Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today in the new year of 2024. And I know our last episode we dropped was a retrospect of our favorite episodes from 2023. But today, our official first episode, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about pastoral burnout or ministry burnout if you're not a pastor, but you serve a ministry. And I feel like it's just an important topic to discuss at the beginning of the year, because I know as we kind of start off our year, we try to get the wind in our sails. Like probably by the time we get to December, for some of us, that wind is going to be out of our sails, and we're going to start feeling the burn. We're going to start feeling defeated and everything else. So actually joining me today on this podcast is my co-host, Micah Current. Micah, how are you doing today, sir?
Man, I'm more blessed than I deserve. We're in the middle of a kitchen renovation, and we're close. We're almost to the finish line, and the guy's been here the last 2 or 3 days, and Andy's put a ton of work in. I'll be so glad when that's done, though. So, if either of you have had any experience of renovations and contractors and stuff, it's great to see the end result. However, it's like dragging things across the finish line because there's always something else to fix or something else that needs added to the price tag or whatever. So
yeah.
And then I have 3 weeks of grad school left. So I'm pumped. I'm there.
Awesome. And then also joining us today is Jordan Halstead. Jordan, what is going on, my friend?
Nothing much. So excited about this new year with our ministry and with just our family trying to figure things out. Things are going really, really well over here in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
What are you trying to figure out?
Well,
how to run away from a tornado?
Probably.
No. When we hear the sirens, we go outside. It was actually really funny. That was when I met all my neighbors for the first time. We had tornado sirens going off, and like the Ohio boy in me is like, "What's a tornado look like?" And I walked outside, and all my neighbors were like peeking out. I was like, "All right, anybody want to kick off with a barbecue?" And they were like, "Listen, don't tempt us. We'll do it." No, some of the things that we're just trying to figure out at the moment. This is an IYC year for us, so for my family, we have to figure out who's going to watch my kid. Is my wife going with us? Things like that. So just trying to figure out, IYC is our International Youth Convention. It's a Church of God thing. I don't know who all listens to this podcast and whatnot, but for us, it's a big convention in youth ministry where at least 1,000, 2,000. I don't know what their number is looking like for this one, but the last one, it was a little shy of 2,000 coming off of COVID, and we're going to Florida, so we're planning that out, trying to figure all that stuff out, and hopefully down this year we'll have another little one on the way. That's what we're trying for. So, just lots of things trying to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for our listeners in Uruguay who did not know what IYC was. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
you get three Church of God pastors on one podcast, and I think the three of us know what IYC is, and we probably all attended one.
So, but some people don't know what IYC is. Yeah.
I know, I'm being funny.
Oh, goodness.
Well, so one thing that my boss always tells me is there's the curse of knowledge. Like sometimes you just need to over-explain something. And so that's why I was like, I should probably just go ahead and say what that is. Because you want to make sure that people know in case they don't. Because you don't want them to be like, what on earth is he talking about?
Yeah. Goodness gracious. All right. So before we start talking about our main topic of burnout, stories gone wild. I know, Jordan, it's been a while since you've been on the show, so we'll let you go last so you can think of a story goes wild. Unless you have one right off the top of your head, you're like, hey, here we go.
I don't think I have one, so I'll let you guys go first.
Okay. So, oh my goodness. So it was, oh goodness. I'll share one. So, like I said, like I was telling Jordan at the beginning of the show, like I'm here at the Children's Pastors Conference in Orlando, Florida, and I decided to volunteer this year because it was going to be cheaper, like significantly cheaper, like 2/3 of the price is cut off the registration price, and plus I get my food and my lodging covered. So I'm very glad to do that. but there's just a lot of times where, I think what makes it wild or maybe more weird is that as you get older, people think, oh, you know how to do everything. I've never rented a car from an airport before. And just the thought, so it's like, okay, because every time, we either drive or a lot of times if I flew, like I don't fly very often, and all the times I've flown, you know, it's like, oh, we flow here. And then I think like last time we got a car rental, I think my wife and I was coming down for like one of our anniversary things. And this was before we had kids, and she got everything all set up. So I go and I'm like, okay, I'll rent a car. And I did this, I did that. Well, then they have this thing that said, hey, go ahead and check in early. So then that way, all you have to do is just go to just walk out to the car lot, just go to the attendee and then do all that. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, then I'm so used to doing everything digitally now, Apple Pay, Google Pay, whatever. I didn't bring my church card with me. I just like my physical card. So I'm walking and they're like, oh, I get to do it. You have to have the physical card. I'm thinking, oh, crap. What am I going to do now? Luckily, I can get reimbursed, but I'm just like, oh, well, duh, I didn't do that. So I have to use my personal card to do my rental car. But then they had this other thing but to avoid it, I thought, well, hey, I know how I can avoid it. I could just go ahead and do this other thing where literally all I have to do is walk to the car, open up the door, get inside, start the car, and drive away. And I'm thinking, wait, that's a thing now? I was so confused about all this. And then, of course, they check all my information, my confirmation and everything at the gate before I actually drive off the lot. But I'm just like, oh, that's weird. Like I've never, so I'm sitting here feel like I'm like 12 years old, not knowing what the heck I'm doing at the time. And I'm like in my 40s. So I'm like, how do I do this car rental thing? So I think that's my story gone wild. Nothing. It's just like, sometimes I just felt like, man, I feel so stupid now because I don't know how to do this. Hey, there's Alicia. Hello, Alicia.
She's always bombing our recording sessions.
No, mostly it's the cats. So
that too.
All right, Micah, what about your stories gone wild?
You've never rented a car? Wow.
I've always driven everywhere, so I have no need to rent a car.
Well, I was thinking like from the higher ed perspective, like both because I've wore hats in both ministry and higher education. And higher ed, like as admins, if you're booking travel for like say I'm booking travel for the dean that I work for, I take care of his rental car, I take care of his plane tickets, I take care of any airfare, any sort of travel, food, per diem, any of those things. Like right now I'm one of our guys that I reference often on Nerd Talk, Chad, he's in Ireland right now doing study abroad recruiting. And so like we had to get his plane ticket ahead of time. We had to get his rental car ahead of time. We had to make sure he had travel insurance and all those things. So he doesn't have to do it. I have to do it. So it's funny you mentioned that. In reference to stories gone wild, I think I texted you a couple of days ago, and I've been thinking of stories, and I've been, how you have your document, and so I'll be doing whatever around the house or at work, and I think of this story, so I just email myself the story real quick. And so I was thinking about a couple of years ago, well, let's say about a decade ago now, in my first year of ministry at my first full-time church, I was the worshiping young adults pastor at the time, and we were looking for a children's pastor. And so we had two prospects. One was, from pretty significant distance away, and we didn't know that, the salary was going to be, enough for somebody to move. And it was more like a 3/4 position, half position. They were going to have to be bivocational if they did in fact move and take that position. So, and then they had another application from a girl that I knew, who in fact that I used to date. And so it was the girl that I dated before I met my wife, Alicia. And this girl and I were friends. We had dated off and on for almost a year. We had a really good friendship. I knew her family, and everything was good, right? So we were good friends. There was a lady who caught wind of it in the church, who was kind of a control freak, especially in the in regards to the children's ministry. And so she caught wind that this girl and I used to date, and proceeded to make a huge deal about it. So as a part of her interview process, I used to have worship practice on Wednesday nights, and so they had to set up a meeting between this woman, the girl I used to date, and myself and the pastor. And they set us down in a room, like side by side, like we were like being questioned for a criminal investigation. And they were like, "Can you guys work together? Are you guys going to be professional? Are you guys like?" And I'm like, the pastor wasn't doing it. It was this woman more so than it was the pastor. The pastor thought it was ridiculous, but he was trying to appease this crazy woman's thought. And so we were like, yeah, we're friends. We've been friends. And at the time, I think I had already started dating Alicia at that point. And so it was like, and my mother-in-law was our office manager. So like, it wasn't like we were like, I wasn't going to go sneak around the corner and take, Lindsay out. Like, I'm dating her daughter. Like, how
oh my God,
how stupid do you think I am? And as much as we talk about scandals and pastors, that have fallen from grace and the megachurch thing, and here on Scott Stedman's podcast, it's like, I'd never do anything like that. So I just thought about that the other day and was like, how wild was it that I was, 25, 26, I was Jordan's age, thinking, am I going to lose my job because I used to date a girl, but I thought that she would be a good fit for this job. She applied for it. I have no interest in her. We're friends. Everything's fine. But this woman got wind that we used to date, and she made a big deal about it. So that's my story's gone wild.
And see, it's stuff like that. You know how we talk a little bit about church scandals and all that stuff. And sometimes, I feel like sometimes it's usually like the pastors being dishonest and kind of covering up, or at least that's kind of like what we've been seeing. But I understand why sometimes we get so caught up or stuff like that, because even little stuff like that, where you're not doing anything wrong, where something was like a past thing that's not going to have an effect anymore, all of a sudden it becomes a big deal. And it's like, why is this even a big deal anymore? Like it's that sort of thing that I just boggles my mind sometimes. So,
the thing that blew my mind was that nobody else cared but this woman.
Yeah.
And we like, I want to say, better get my math right because my wife's sitting in the other room. She could probably hear me. My wife and I started dating in 2014. Mm-hmm. We got married in 2015. This girl and I stopped dating at the beginning of 2013. So it had been well over a year.
Yeah.
That we were even in a romantic relationship. And we had moved on. And it's just like, it felt like she was very much like trying to rip scabs off and, try to get in the middle of our business. And it wasn't like there was anything against me. It was more so that he was very territorial over the children's ministry area. And it really had nothing to do with me. It's just that she wanted to sabotage this girl that I used to date's chances of becoming the children's pastor of the church. So it's just ridiculous. The way around ridiculous. Jordan, Did we stall enough to give you time to come up with a story?
Oh, I got one. Yeah, I've got something. So I'm a youth pastor in Oklahoma City, and youth ministry is a different beast. Both of you guys have been in ministry. I mean, it's a ministry podcast. So a lot of our listeners who may have served in ministry will get some of this. I run a Minecraft server, so a video game server for my students. And there's a couple of kids that were like, we're all in for this. And then there's a couple kids who are like, I'm in it to just wreak havoc. Like, no one's allowed to do the greatness of whatever. I'm here to destroy everything. And I'm like, oh gosh, what is going to happen? The problem is the kid who wants to destroy everything and mess with everybody is my boss's grandson. And so he instigates everything. And he's like, hey, Jordan, you should do this. Hey, Micah, you should do this. Scott, you should definitely not do that one. And so he started instigating. And one of the kids walked in and was like, well, you ticked me off, and then went and blew up his entire base that he'd been building for 2 or 3 months now. And I see this video on our Discord server. It's just a chat room area, and he posts this video of the kid in action, and there's this bickering back and forth, and I'm like, why do I get myself into these situations where I have to mediate children? Oh, wait, that's right, because I love them. And it made me laugh, because I'm like, when we do ministry, a lot of times I feel like if we're not having successful moments, we're just banging our head against walls and doors, and there's just a lot of things we're just like, why did you do that? Like the headache that is now there, but having these conversations and having the fun moments with these kids, I think makes it all worth it. And it was so funny, because I walked into service today. Well, as we record, I walked into service, and 3 of the 4 kids involved came and approached me about it. And I'm like, guys, it's a video game. This was like over a week ago. Like, why are we still flipping out about this? But it's important to them, and I got a really good kick out of it.
Awesome. Yeah. Goodness. Yeah. So burnout. Let's talk about burnout. So I think the best way to start this conversation is when we think about the topic of burnout, it's something that I think if you are in ministry, or I think even if you're like working, even if you work a regular job, that there's times where you could probably experience things of dissatisfaction. You can feel burnout. You can feel just like, like you can just feel kind of very weak, or maybe you just kind of feel like you're just drifting through your job or drifting through your ministry. And I think a lot of times when we look at burnout, I can remember probably, and maybe Jordan and maybe Micah, because I forgot that you were also at Marengo too occasionally, but for somebody who kind of grew up at church camp and been at Marengo, I can remember when camp pastors would talk about ministry and everything else, they always would talk about this thing called burnout. And the solution to not having burnout was you just gotta be strong in your faith. You just gotta cling on to Jesus. You just gotta
buck up.
You gotta be in the Word. You gotta have a good, healthy prayer life. You gotta do all these things. And if you do all these things, then you will not have burnout. And yet, I think just for me, speaking from my personal ministry, there's times where literally I've had all those things, and yet I still experience burnout. Not to the point where I have just basically said, I'm done with ministry, screw it, I'm done, I'm over. But I think that there's something a lot more going on with burnout than just not having a vibrant prayer life. And so I want to kind of talk a little bit about, just kind of what your thoughts or what were things that you were told about what burnout is, what burnout isn't, and kind of what the solutions were to kind of prevent burnout, or even like what causes burnout. Like, so I just wanted to kind of know like what growing up in the church or your experience at the beginning of ministry or going through your training, what was the conversation about burnout for you? And Jordan, why don't I go ahead and just start with you first?
Yeah. So my dad was a youth pastor for my entire life, through formative years up until I went into ministry myself. We had like a couple years overlap, but that was about it. Before he went into senior ministry, and he always talked about just take your me time. You're always going to give so much of yourself, and if you're anything like me, you're going to be like giving your absolute all to the church. Find time to escape and unplug, and don't let your phone dictate you, because if you always answer every single phone call and take every single text, like you'll get burned out very, very quickly. Like, when you get married and you have kids, you're going to need that. And as I entered ministry, me and Katie were married, and I was serving part-time right before we got married, as we were engaged. And then we got married and I entered full-time, and I've been in full-time. Oh gosh. 2017 was when we entered full-time ministry, but I've been serving since 2015. So it's been a while that we've been doing ministry, not as like just volunteers, but just like as the lead. And what I've really come to understand is, yes, it's extremely important to be in your prayer life. It's extremely important to have worship time and to read your Bible, but it's also time for you to find a place where you can not be Jordan, the youth pastor, Jordan, the pastor, Jordan, our youth leader, or hey, I'm the coordinator for this, or whatever your title is. Like, you find where you are and where you are with God. Because if your whole identity gets wrapped up in that, you're going to get burned out really, really quick. And that was one of the hardest lessons I learned, especially when we moved out here to Oklahoma. I'd came off a pretty hard situation when I was out in Ohio, and kind of some church hurt and burnout a little bit. And I walked in and just got to this place here in Oklahoma and just have really thrived. And when I started, though, I had a point to prove. Man, I'm going to be the best youth pastor this church has ever seen.
Oh yeah.
Later to find out that the senior pastor was the youth pastor here in the '80s. So I'll never live up to that one. But it was just having that mentality of, I am going to be the bee's knees, the cat's meow. Like, I'm going to do this, and I don't have to. Like, I just need to be me. I just need to be the best that I can be. And that's what I had to learn over the past, I've been here 2.5 years now. And it's been a great ride, and having to learn that, to not burn yourself out, to make the time for your family, especially when kids are little. You don't want to miss out on that.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. Like, then I want to ask a question before I say my point. At the last place you served in ministry before you got to Oklahoma, were you feeling burnout there before you left that position and took?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott, because the reality is, I don't know. I've thought about that for a while, and I don't really know if I was burned out or if I was just hurt. Because part of our story, and I won't get into too much detail, but part of our story is that God started to move me in December, and we left in end of February. So like, I started feeling the inklings to move, and things started getting placed, even in February. And I didn't even get here until June, by the time that I went through candidating and all that, here in Oklahoma. But with that process, I had to really figure out, kind of, okay, am I hurting? Am I not? Is this an exciting time? Am I not? Or is it not? Like, there was just so much going on. But I think for me, I was just really hurt by the actions.
And I'm curious, like, would and I guess this is something to really, I mean, we not necessarily the debate right now, but does hurt kind of fit in that burnout category? I mean, because I'm thinking, like, if you're doing ministry and you have this season where things are just rocking the boat and you're just feeling hurt, you're feeling, a lot of emotions, a lot of things happening, a lot of woundedness happening, would hurt kind of go into burnout? Are those like distant cousins, or are they kind of like, those
a little closer than we like to believe,
frenemies, or maybe they're frenemies, they're close, but they don't like each other. So, I mean, that's something to really, really ponder about, is like experiencing hurt within a church, and especially as a church leader, is that also considered a part of burnout? So no, good thoughts. Micah, what about you?
So I would say a couple of things. I mean, I always have a lot to say. I think that's why you had me on your show all the time. But I think Jordan brings up a lot of great points about hurt, and Scott, you bring up a lot of great points about hurt. And I kind of want to do a couple of different things, or divided up into a couple of different spaces. But like when you talked about Marengo, Scott, and tough it out, and you just got to have a better prayer life. I don't think that's just a camp thing. I think that's a generational thing. I think that like our dads and grandfathers who have been in ministry, and the three guys that are sitting around this table virtually right now, like we grew up in the church, so to speak, quote unquote, grew up in the church of God. And it was just beaten into our brains that like, well, maybe you're going through a tough time. Well, you need to pray more. Maybe you need to read your Bible more. Maybe you need to come to church more. We offer Sunday night and Wednesday night services. Like maybe you should be here more. I don't think that like, yes, prayer is important. Yes, worship's important. Yes, community is important. Yes, being a part of your church family is important. But like the struggles and things that you deal with on a personal level, those folks aren't always going to be there, whether it's your pastor, whether it's your peers at church, whether it's people that you do life with in community groups and life groups. It's there's those moments, where you're on your own and you're not always with your spouse, or you're not with your friends, or I don't know, Jordan, you and I and Scott, like we talk on a fairly regular basis, and Jordan calls me every day. And I when he doesn't call me, I wonder if something's wrong. Like, it's just that closeness that we all have.
Yeah.
But like but I think that part of the closeness comes from us going through some of the stuff that we went through.
Shared life experience.
And I shared, towards the end of last year about my journey with some anxiety and coming down with anxiety, like pretty severely. And I think a lot of that has to do with burnout and church hurt. And even though I haven't actively served in ministry in over a year at a church, some of that stuff is still there. And some of that stuff I'm still dealing with. And some of that stuff I'm still working through in therapy. And some of that stuff I'm still, dealing with on a daily basis, and kind of have to coach myself through the fact that like, you know what? It's like Jordan said, it's okay to say no. It's okay not to answer your phone. It's okay not to respond to a text. It's okay to leave your phone upstairs in your room. It's okay to, and that was my biggest thing. I think early on in ministry was like, I was so afraid that another opportunity wouldn't present itself that I wasn't going to get one if I said no.
Yeah.
And so I remember being this young, eager worship pastor, worship leader kid, and I was like, sure, I'll lead worship for young adult service. Sure, I'll lead worship for youth ministry. Sure, I'll lead worship on Wednesday night and Sunday morning and Sunday night, and spend all day at the church on Sundays. And oh, by the way, go to seminary and take care of my grandparents. And sure, I'll do this and go through ordination and go through grad school. And I just had to get to the point where I was like, you know what? It's okay to say no. It's okay to, and I've been in therapy for almost 2 years now, and my therapist, talks a lot of time about boundaries and how healthy boundaries are and setting up those boundaries. And, the way that she kind of describes them to me is that like, we set up boundaries initially. It doesn't mean the boundaries have to stay the same way all the time, but at least we have those boundaries in place. And if we want to like make adjustments, right? So like if we want to modify them as we go, and maybe we want to do a little bit more during the season of our life because we know we're going to be busy, but then we can go back and put that back in place once we're done with that busy season. It's just, going back to it, I think that like the generational thing being in respect to, you got to pray more and you got to read your Bible more. I mean, like, I think it's just a mindset of like almost foolishness to a degree. Like, and I'm not trying to insult the generation before us, but like, it just feels like, and I'm not saying, the three of us sitting around this call right now have all struggled with some sort of mental illness, whether it's anxiety, depression, whatever you want to call it. And we shared it on various shows and podcasts, and we did it on Nerd Talk with the whole Moon Knight thing. You've had family members like last fall, you guys. I I don't know what happened, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But there was a period of time where I didn't want to leave my house because I had such bad anxiety that I couldn't get in the car and I couldn't leave my house.
Yeah.
And it was crippling. And so when somebody says, "Oh, you're just letting the devil win and you just need to go to church," I'm like, well, you don't know what I'm feeling. You don't know how I feel, like physically, to the point where like I'm shaking and convulsing and I can't get in my car to go to work, let alone go to church or go to the coffee shop. Like, I just want to stay home. I don't want to do anything. And like, by the grace of God, therapy and medicine, I'm not 100% better, but I'm getting there. But I think all that to say, I feel like I'm on this huge tangent at this point, but I think that like this may very well be a result of a longer issue in my life as it results of church hurt and church burnout and the scars and the woundedness of ministry that nobody wants to talk about, but they happen. And you two are brothers and you're my brothers, and we went through some stuff together and apart, and it's like, I'm here to tell you it's real life. That stuff happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, you bring up a lot of good points because, and I don't know if it's necessary. I mean, you mentioned like the older generation and kind of, well, just go to church, just pray, just read your Bible. People who are teaching me at church camp, hey.
And do you think, before you go, Scott, do you think that when I say generational thing, I don't think that the generation that is kind of lecturing us has had to deal with some of the stuff that we've had to deal with.
And I'm going to get to that because I have some
statistics. Well, I watched a video on TikTok the other day about something, and it was like, tell me you're millennial with millennial trauma without telling me you're millennial with millennial trauma. And it talks about like 9/11, living through 9/11. It talks about living through Columbine. It talks about, going through the recession in 2008. It talks about the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, and you're seeing all these things in the age and evolution of technology and the internet, and like going to college and having student loans. And it's like, no wonder we're so messed up.
Yeah. So there's an article that was, now I have a subscription to the Barna group because for all my doctorate stuff, I have all this research to look at stuff for my project. And I just happened to just kind of typed in something. And there's this article from March of last year. And the title of this article says, "Why are pastors burning out personally and collectively?" So what it's tackling at is they're seeing a trend where not only are we seeing pastors, individually going through this time of burnout, but they're even seeing just pastors collectively, like across the board, like they're all starting to hit the same wavelengths and patterns of burnout. So I want to kind of bring up some, I'm not going to bore you, but just some statistics. So they did this survey back in 2015. And in 2015, when they looked at pastoral's risk for burnout, 63% of pastors said they had a low risk, 26% was a medium risk, and 11% was a high risk. And it's based on a lot of different data and information that they focused on. Then the last time they did this survey was in 2022. And the low risk went from 63% to 23%. Medium risk went from 26% to 37%. And the high risk went from 11% to 40% as far as burnout, pastoral burnout rate.
Crap.
Now, listen to this. Here's what's interesting. When you look at pastoral burnout, 51% burnout, female ministers. When you look at those who are under 45, it's 50%. Those who are over the age of 45, it drops down to 36%. 69% who are in that high-risk group has considered quitting, and 21% has not considered quitting who are in that high-risk category. Now, the female minister thing, I totally get, mainly because I think in ministry, it's even in ministry, even in denominations where they acknowledge and they affirm women as church leaders, I still feel like that even though they acknowledge that, I still feel like women have to work a lot harder to be respected or to even get any type of like upper leadership positions. Whether that is true within a denomination or whether that's just a mindset. Like just actually just today scrolling through Facebook, one of my friends who's a minister, she's been out sick, and she's even talking about, hey, 2024, I have to really set on boundaries because she's someone who's goes. And I think a lot of that may be her personality, but I want to know if a lot of that too is I'm a female and I'm also been called to be a pastor. And sometimes there has been opposition due to my sex in my calling to serve. So I think that there is, now they kind of broke it down by asking questions. And here's where I think, Micah, your comment rings true. So when you're looking, and they jumble it around, but I'm going to look at those who are in the high risk category. So out of all the church leaders, and this is pastors and even those who are not pastors, who are church leaders, 81% say that the risk of their burnout was because of average, below average, or poor mental and emotional health. 74% has suffered from depression sometime during their ministry. 66% frequently feel emotionally or mentally exhausted. 65% tenure at their current church has been a disappointment. 52% tenure at their current church has not increased their passion for ministry. And then if we want to continue to go down, like 33% less confident in their calling today than when they began ministry. Yeah, that's pretty much a majority of it. But then when you look at low risk, those who are in the low risk category, when they're asking these questions, it's all 0%. Like all the who have answered this question has either been in a medium risk or has fallen in medium risk or high risk category. And then they even kind of mentioned that, one of the main reasons that they're seeing on a systematic level of pastors is that a lot of it is because we are living in a culture where culture is changing so rapidly. And a lot of that is because the culture is changing rapidly, but the church expectation of their pastors has not changed with the culture. So as the demand, so basically it feels like the demand for the pastor to do more and more and more, and church leaders to do more and more and more,
just getting higher and higher.
The church, it keeps getting higher and higher and higher, but then the church's expectation continues to go higher, which is now causing that. Also, they say that, and Barna's suggestion to reduce this is to change the church's expectation, to provide a more support systems, and even retooling the entire leadership structure of a church. Wow. And I think, because of how quickly the culture is going, and it even says that trends that can be identified are more fixable. And they say that, if we can understand the times and know what to do, and this is kind of like paraphrasing 1 Chronicles 12:32, it might be possible that the U.S. pastor best days are still ahead of us. But I think, so when I think about pastoral burnout, I think that this data is shocking to a degree, but it goes back to the whole thing. It's not about praying more. It's not about reading your Bible more. It's not about going to church more. Like, obviously, if there's something going on with your mind, mental health, and whether that's just kind of stuff that's been happening through family or maybe some type of trauma you may have dealt with, or even if it's just because that unrealistic expectation that your congregation has for the pastor that's causing a lot of this mental exhaustion, then yeah, I can see why a lot of people, and I think maybe the big thing too is, again, all these people who fit in this category are under 45. And I think there's that mentality within church culture that if you are a young pastor, that you are going to be the kind of the golden child to really transform the church and get the church kind of back on track. But if you're over 45 and you're kind of towards your retirement years, you're just more like, well, this is a pastor that's just going to continue to love and care for us. So I don't think the expectation for the pastor to kind of flip or turn things around, I don't think that level of expectation is on an older pastor than it is with a younger pastor.
Well, they're going to ride. Well, I think you're right. I think they ride the status quo and they just ride it out to retirement, just don't rock the boat. And like the sad reality is it's either the church or the pastor that goes first. And it's like, what I mean by that is that like, okay, the pastor's not going to rock the boat and make the people happy, but then people are going to get tired of the church not moving forward and they're going to leave. And then the church is going to die as a result.
Yeah. And I think, and I mean, and I think the problem, yeah, so I think there's that. There's definitely a lot of that. And the other thing that I think is so fascinating about this is I think it's also a change of mentality for those of us who are pastors. Because I think, growing up, I had an older generation of pastors who were praying for me, that were encouraging me in ministry, that were giving me advice. And I think that advice is still warranted. I think it's still good. Like, I mean, yeah, I think it's good. Like Jordan, you said your dad said, make sure you have your me time, because the church ministry is going to take up so much of your time that you need to have time for your family. So you have to have those boundaries. And yeah, I think that advice is still good. I think what ends up happening, or at least, and I'll just speak for myself, I think what happens is when there's something that's going on at the church or with a church member, then the pastor has to, at least if you're the lead pastor, you have to drop everything and do it. Because if you do not, then there's going to be a consequence. So it's like, oh, I want to make sure I have my family time, but if I don't drop this and take this phone call, because I know this person's been struggling with a lot of health issues and this could be very important, then if I don't take this call, am I going to have a meeting with the board of elders the next week? So I think as far as the lead pastor, or even like any type of those who do any type of like pastoral care, like that's a huge thing. So it's not like, oh, I'm actually going to now make sure I spend time with my family. Like I still feel bad. Like I remember one of my first time pastoring, like my first year of pastoring at a church, me and Laura and Peter, we decided to go take Laura out for her birthday. We went to a cavern and we just kind of had a fun time at a cavern. And while I'm in the cave, someone was calling me. A church member was trying to get a hold of me and couldn't get a hold of me because I had no signal in the cave because someone passed away. Now, granted, they kind of knew that, I was celebrating Laura's birthday. I was out. So they understood why they couldn't reach me. But I mean, I still felt bad about that I was not there to take that phone call. And once I got the phone call, and once I finally were able to get a hold of me, I said, okay, we drove back. I dropped Laura and Peter off, and then I immediately went over to the person's house who just lost her husband and sat with them and talked with them and again, profusely apologized. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was in the cave, but it's stuff like that where, as a pastor, you feel like, oh, I just failed. And oh no, is something bad going to happen? So there is a bit of anxiety. And there's one thing, and I don't know what you guys feel about this quote, but I saw this quote where someone was talking about burnout, and they said, what can I do? Like someone was making a plea, what can I do to kind of help avoid burnout? And someone says, make sure that remember that ministry is a thing you do, not the thing you do.
Yeah.
And I think and I guess kind of how I interpret that is, maybe when you're a pastor and you're getting a salary and you're doing ministry, it almost feels like, well, ministry is the thing I do because it's basically what I'm using to provide for my family and also trying to make impacts in people's lives for the kingdom of God. But for someone who may be a volunteer or someone who may be taking a leadership position and not getting paid, I think it can go either way. That we have to remember that ministry is a thing. And out of every aspect of your life, from your physical health to your family health, to your social health, to your mental health, to your spiritual health, ministry cannot be the thing that controls all of that. Because I think a lot of times, even though it's church and it's tied in with Christianity, it's tied in with the gospel of Jesus Christ and Christianity, we have to remember that even Jesus had to set boundaries and take time to rest. Jesus had to take time. I mean, and even not necessarily him praying with the Father, but hey, Jesus was even sleeping in the boat. Jesus was tired. And then all of a sudden, it's like the disciples are like, hey, Jesus, we're going to drown. The sea's getting wild. And I think there's times where, even though we only see a fraction of Jesus's ministry and his adulthood, I mean, there's probably lots of times where Jesus just basically said, hey, we're in this town. We're going to just sit here for a couple of days, do some ministry, but we're also going to sit here and relax, just enjoy life, break some bread, have some meals, have some nice friendly fireside chats. And I think when it comes to the idea of pastoral burnout, it's about boundaries, and it's about making sure that you take, you have to almost kind of put your own health and kind of put that in a huge perspective and make that a priority, besides you putting the church or the mission as your priority, even if you're paid or an unpaid leader at the church. Does any of this make sense? Do you guys agree or disagree with me on? I know I've been rambling a bunch, but what do you guys think?
Well, I think that we did it. It was ironic because the three of us did an episode about being pastors' kids. And one of the things that I shared was that I was very resentful of my dad as a kid because he didn't set boundaries, and not boundaries with his kids, but boundaries with his job, because the church, even to this day, he's just so wrapped up in the church and what board he can sit on and what steering committee he can be on and whatever. Right. And so I think there's a lot of health in setting boundaries and having church folks respect those boundaries. And if they don't, then that's on them. Because there has to be a hard, yes, there are emergencies. Yes, there are times when people get into car accidents, or somebody's fatally killed, or you name it, the circumstance. Yes, and hopefully it's not going to be all the time, but there are those circumstances. But outside of those special circumstances, I don't think that it's fair. I don't think that it's right. I don't think that it's okay that everybody in the church thinks that you as a pastor should just drop at their beck and call. That's not healthy. That's not okay. For me, that's a struggle, because it's okay, I have office hours between these hours and these hours. I work at the church this day, this day, this day, this day, this day. I'm off on this day and this day. I'm there on Sunday. If you want an appointment, you want to grab coffee, you want to grab lunch, you want to, grab dinner with my family or my spouse and your spouse, let's do that. Let's get it on the calendar. But respect those boundaries unless it's an emergency. And so I guess that's my thought. I mean, Jordan, what do you think? Jordan? We talked a lot.
I think you guys nailed it, to be honest. It's the church. And here's the thing that the church doesn't understand. We're just as human as they are. Yes. We need that. There are so many times where the church itself, and the church being the body of believers that we serve, yes, we should serve them with everything that we can. But there's a limitation. And we're going to need moments where I love this analogy of just the cup. How much do I have in my cup? What can I give you from my cup? But when am I at a point that I'm just giving you drips, or I'm just giving you air? There's literally nothing else there. When am I getting my cup filled? And I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to figure out is my dad always was hunting growing up. That was what filled his cup. Now it's he's getting a little bit more mellow, and he loves to spend time with his kids, especially now that they moved closer to both me and my brother. And at Christmas, that was what he did. He just wanted to spend time with his kids and his grandkids. And typically there's a phone call that just stops us, and he's got to do something, or he's always talking about work. I don't remember hearing anything in the 2 days that we were with him about the church unless I asked. It was me prodding instead of him saying it. And that was something that really blessed me. And as I'm in ministry, as I'm approaching 30 in the next year, what does that look like for me? I always kind of look at how did my dad do things, and then how am I doing? And I saw him in his later years, his prime, in the, like, I didn't see his struggles in the first few years of ministry and his first 10 even. And so I don't remember some of those heartaches and things like that of, man, I don't get to spend time with my kids. And there was a conversation we had where he's like, I missed out on a few things. Your mom raised you guys. And that's something that I think our generation specifically doesn't want to do. We are very involved in the kids' lives. Like there was a video I saw not long ago, and it showed how the dads of this generation are more involved because they're taking the mentality of, I want to be the person I needed growing up. And it's like, the church doesn't always understand, because historically, okay, Micah, being pastor's kids, how often was your dad around growing up?
He wasn't.
And that's not trying to bash your dad. That's not what I'm going at. It's the church needed him, and that's how the reality of their generation, where our generation is focusing on, I need to make sure that I'm good. You and I are both in counseling. I don't know about Scott, but Scott does counseling and things like that.
Scott probably needs counseling listening to the two of us.
I need to go to a counselor for all the counseling I'm doing for you.
Yeah. So like for me, I started counseling, and it's something that my work is blessing me with, and it's a beautiful thing that I can do. But they also have this understanding, and the church understands, and especially my youth team, they really understand this, that I can't do good for you if I'm not doing well myself. And I think that's one of the big things that people going through burnout and going through those situations. Like, I remember having a conversation at my first full-time church in Ohio. And I talked with my team that I was putting together, and I said, I want to put you guys on this team. I want you guys to help, because I don't want to be burned out. The guy who was one of the guys on the team, his dad was a board member. And he went to the board member, his father, and said, so Jordan's already feeling burnout. I was there not even 6 months. And like completely took it out of line with it. And you hear what you want to hear. And that's the thing. Like, our people don't understand, because like, I'm trying to protect myself. I'm trying to protect my wife. I'm trying to protect our ministry. I'm trying to protect our church. Like, there's so many layers that like I have to always be thinking about as a minister. And it's like, I can't just walk in and say, all right, Scott, you got this, and leave. Like, that would look poor on my part if I just got burned out, or I was struggling mentally. Like, I am always talking about my mental health with my team anymore, because I want them to know where I'm sitting. Like we had a big event coming up, and I told them I'm not doing well, and I'm looking at counseling, and they were like, okay, like, go do it. And we got your back on this one. And they ran it for me. And they helped carry a lot of the weight. And now they're like, how you doing? And I'm like, I'm doing better. And it's because I'm very focused on, my family needs me, because I'm the sole provider for finances. And so I need to be at a job, but also I love what I do. And I don't want to be in a spot where I look at this as a job and not a passionate thing that I absolutely love doing. And I think that's the thing that our generation, I think, is starting to understand and get right in a lot of areas. Yeah.
Well, I think too that like I got to the point where I've shared this on this podcast, but like at the last ministry assignment that I had, I was just going through so many different things: school, church hurt, being a graduate student again, various things, and something had to give. And it was like, I tell this when I share my story all the time with people. Like, I got to the point where I was at the church 7 days a week, whether it was like my wife and my marriage are more, I felt very convicted at one point. I was like, my wife and my marriage is more important than this church. And God's not going to judge me based on, in fact, God's going to appreciate the fact that I took time for my spouse and making time for her, rather than being so burnt out and cranky that I couldn't function. Right. And so there's a lot of lessons, and I think our generation's learning the lessons that the generation before us didn't. So, Scott, you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the kind of, we talked a little bit about boundaries. So I think just to kind of appropriately kind of end this show, what's one boundary that you guys do or would recommend to kind of help those who are in ministry. So I'll go first with mine, because this was something I heard. And this was a pastor, I think it was on a podcast, but this is a pastor who, it was John Mark Comer, the guy who wrote a bunch of different books. He ended up like taking a sabbatical from his church, and someone else has taken it. Now he's kind of doing other things. But he was talking about like when he came back from his sabbatical, or when he started coming back after he kind of felt burned out, the one thing he did to kind of ease himself back into ministry is he basically said, okay, today, these are the things that I want to accomplish today. So he made a list, whether it was for that day or for that week. And what he would do is, if it was for the day, once he got that list done, so let's say if he had 10 items, and he said, just keep it at 10. These are 10 things I want to try to accomplish today. When he got those 10 things done, it didn't matter if he worked a full 8 hours or not. Once those 10 things were done, he just went home. And he just went home and relaxed. And that was his thing. Now, he said sometimes, there'd be times where those 10 things may take the full 8 hours. Sometimes they may go a little, sometimes he may say, okay, I have to add that onto the next day's list. But that was his way of kind of easing back into ministry. And I kind of do the same thing. Not too much anymore. But I kind of broke down, I started doing that first. And then what I broke down is, I said, since I'm the family minister, so I oversee children and youth, I broke down my days. So like Monday is my children's ministry day. I do all my children's ministry responsibilities. I do that all Monday. That means sending out lesson plans to my volunteers, figuring out if we're going to do a game, a craft, or a snack that month, that Sunday, any kind of planning stuff for the future. All that is done that day. Next day is all my youth ministry stuff. The next day is all my administrative tasks, all the things I have to do. And then the other stuff is just kind of like, responding to emails, checking, or even just kind of doing like future planning on other things. Or maybe it's more of just doing more community stuff, like continue to see what the preschool needs to kind of continue to build that reputation, see what good ways I can impact the local public schools, or do any of those things. So I kind of break it down on those 4 work days during the weekday, and then I have my sabbatical day, and then of course Sunday I'm pretty much at the church all day Sunday, because that's just what works for me. So I think I think that's kind of the big advice for me is, when you start your day, or even when you leave the office, okay, here's the 10 things I want to do tomorrow. When you get in the office, you go. If you get those 10 things done, guess what? You're done.
Going
and
home.
then maybe,
Yep.
and then there is that temptation where if I'm home, and let's say I'm making lunch, or if I get everything done before lunch, it's like, hey, I have a couple hours before I have to pick up my kids, so I can kind of have me time. Then there might be that time it's like, oh, wait a minute, I need to do this, or oh, I forgot, I have to email this person, I have to do that. Write it down, make it a priority as something you need to do tomorrow. Take that time for you. And I think that's something that you can do if you're just kind of easing back into ministry, if you're especially in that time of transition. I also would say, even if you're starting to feel that tension, or maybe starting to feel some of that burnout where you're starting to feel unmotivated, then slow down and kind of pace yourself, and and maybe do 10 things, or maybe just do 5 things. And like, okay, I did these 5 things, I'm done for today. I did 6 things, 7 things, and then work your way, and just kind of do that until you start to kind of get into a good rhythm. And then, if you feel like you need to do like 30 things in a day, then, God bless you. But that's something that I learned from John Mark Comer. And I think it's been very helpful, just the way I've kind of, when I started out doing ministry, and then even kind of now that I'm kind of in my sophomore year of this new ministry ventures that I am, just kind of trying to stay strong and kind of staying, healthy in all aspects of life. So Jordan, what's a piece of advice that you would give to those who are listening?
For just the mental health side of it, figure out what you like to do. Don't get lost in your job. I love the idea of what you just said, but I also want to say that, like sometimes you may just need to take a day off and just go do what you love to do. and you might just need a day to yourself, whether you're married or engaged or dating or you're single, whatever your status is. Sometimes you just need a day to yourself, and I know that's really hard. I've got a kid, and he's 4, and a wife, and we've been together 10 years. And I understand that they need me, but there's moments where I can't do better for them because I can't do better for myself. And if I'm not in a good place, like, I am a huge Lego guy. When I moved to Oklahoma, like, that was one of the things that I made a priority was, hey, I'm gonna find something I really like to do. And I had like 2 or 3 things, and then I narrowed it down in the past year, and down to really one big thing. And I was like, all right, this is where I'm gonna spend my time. So, like, I get my kid to bed, and unless I've got something else going on that night that Katie and I are talking about, like, I sometimes just take a few minutes and just go hang out in one of our spare bedrooms. I've got a bunch of Lego. You guys can kind of see it in the video. I love doing things like that, and so it doesn't have to be Lego. Find your niche, just whatever it is that, like, lets you not be the ministry leader, where you aren't full-time pastor, where you're not full-time whatever position it is. It's just a way for you to just get your mind off something fun. Like, for me, creativity is a huge thing, and so that's why I do Legos, because I can be as creative as I want with it. So
All right, Micah, and what about you? What's some?
Well, before I get to that, I mean, Jordan could have done a shameless plug for Nerd Talk. And I mean, like, and how the inception of Burnout from Ministry and the Herd of Ministry got him into doing Nerd Talk with Jordan Halstead and bringing me along. And you didn't do it. So clearly Legos
can I get
are
a
more
redo?
important.
Nope, sorry. It's in the.
You only get one chance.
And you blew it.
You did. You blew it. But if you're listening, check out Nerd Talk with Jordan Halstead.
I promise you, I like the show.
We are on all platforms. We cover everything nerd. Shameless plug. No, I as somebody who's had, shared multiple times that I've worn hats in both ministry and higher education, and both have been rewarding at times, both have been stressful at times. But one of the coolest things that I get to do working in higher education is I get to work with my wife. I don't work in the same office with her. I don't work in the same building as her. Like, I drop her off in the morning in her building, and then I drive to my building, and we're on completely opposite sides of campus, and we don't see each other except for at lunch and at the end of the day. Now, one of the coolest things that we get to do, and we learned this, I think, early on, because when I first started at Miami, I worked in a job that I hated. I hated working. I hated going to work every day, but it was a paycheck and it was health insurance. And the church I was working at the time didn't offer that, and it was a part-time job. So I had to take what I could get, right? And so I was working in higher ed, and I hated it. Ended up getting into another role, and I really, really loved it. But it was a high stressful job because we dealt with conduct and sexual assault and domestic violence and things like that.
Yeah.
But in that second job was where I learned this trick, right? So Alicia and I, this is another thing I like about higher ed, is that we work the same hours every day, right? We work 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 4:30, Monday through Friday in the summers. We don't work weekends. We get paid holidays, all those wonderful things that we don't get in ministry, right? But the cool thing that we realized more towards the second job that I took at Miami, when I was dealing with, like I said, conduct and sexual assault, Title IX, all those things, was that 5 o'clock would happen, and we have about a 20-minute car ride to work. And we would get in the car, and we would, I don't want to say a bad word, we would gripe and complain and pitch a fit and cry and, like, really decompress. Decompress is the right word for this. Care about our days, right? What was great, what was bad, who made us mad, what pissed us off, all those things, right? But as soon as we hit the garage door at our house, we turned it off. And so that was our rule. We could say whatever we wanted from the time we got into the car to the time we got into our house, and then we turned it off, and then we were able to go exercise, have dinner together, do the married thing, and, like, enjoy our marriage, because I got to a point where I was just complaining and I was taking it into the house with me, if that makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
And then when COVID happened and we were working from home, we kind of did the same thing, but we shut the doors to the rooms that we were working in at the end of each day because we left our junk in there.
Yeah.
Right. Do you guys get that illustration? So it's like we just decompressing is very important. Not like you're dumping it. Jordan used the illustration of a cup earlier. Not that you're dumping it all over your spouse, but you're sharing about it in a healthy way and leaving it at that. And then you're able to move on, and it's just a healthy way of dealing with the things that you're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the kind of and just the last thing is, if you're experiencing burnout, if you're experiencing mental fatigue, the one thing I would recommend is go talk to somebody, and not just like, if you want to talk to your wife or talk to another trusted pastor colleague, that's good. But I would even suggest, talk to a counselor. That's going to, especially if you're at a point where you're like some of these, like you said, like, man, I'm considering leaving the ministry. I'm considering, leaving the ministry for good, and, seeing it in my rearview mirror. Like, make sure you do talk to a counselor and talk to somebody and really make sure you have that, because maybe there's some stuff in there. Maybe there's some things that you're holding on to that you thought ministry was going to be or what it wasn't going to be that you're kind of holding on to. Maybe there's these unreal expectations you have for yourself that you're putting on yourself in ministry and that you have to kind of dismantle before you can kind of repair. So, friends, that's going to be us for the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to go ahead and send it to share it, to give us a 5-star rating and share it with friends. And also, there's information in the show notes on how you can kind of sponsor the show and even get a nice producer credit at the end of the show, which apparently I'm going to start doing. I don't know if I'll get around to it, but it will be there. So, friends, thank you so much. Hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week.